everyone. Welcome to another episode of Convos with Sazón with yours truly, Cata Mejía. With me today is Joe Bernard. He's the Chief Revenue Officer for NGLmitú. Bienvenido. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me. Appreciate
Thank you for
guys
joining
inviting
me. I'm very excited for our chat today. There is lots to talk about, but I want to start off from the beginning. Let's talk about you. Let's talk about your upbringing. Maybe how your childhood and the environment that you grew up in sparked your initial passion for media and storytelling. Tell us more.
Wow. So, a lot of people who know me know the story. I'm born and raised New York City. I grew up in a housing project up in Harlem. And I was telling the story the other day. Sometimes housing projects, the way they're built, right? They're like 20-story buildings or so. And there are multiple buildings on a property. And in some way, you could kind of get a sense that the building structure is a giant wall that kind of shields your ability to see what's beyond the wall, right? And it becomes this little ecosystem within itself. And, it was a fun childhood growing up, playing around with all the kids that grew up there. But of course, you had to have a lot of imagination in terms of things, right? So we invented games. There wasn't manicured football fields where you were playing football. So we played football on the street, stickball out in the street, all kinds of, games that we invented. And so, I remember at an early age, my mom and my dad, who were incredible, Puerto Rican, individuals who came over to the United States, or the mainland, really, you should say, in 1965, 66. I was born in 1970. They came over to continue to grow and establish an even better life for themselves. And, it was an interesting, full of life universe that was the housing project. And then one day, in the, middle 70s, I'll have to check the date on this, but, obviously that show Chips was on, right? The two California Highway Patrol officers. And of course, you had Ponch and John. And of course, Officer Poncherello, as you know, Eric Estrada, Latino, and probably one of the few Latinos on TV at that time. And my mom watched the show, and she basically would stop me for a second, and she pointed out to me, and she would say, "You see that guy right there, the other one on the motorcycle? He's a Latino just like you." And she would say to me, "And you could do that too," right? Like, it was interesting that she, the vision that she had was that you could do far better, you could do beyond, right? And I say that story, and then you understand the housing project, and you kind of get the sense that there's something beyond those walls that, we were all sort of organized within. And so when I first had a chance to go to choose a school, like choose high school, coming out of junior high, I chose a high school that was probably the furthest away I could find, right? So I'm up in Harlem. I went to Murray Bertram High School downtown in New York City, in Manhattan. So it was a 45-minute train ride from Harlem all the way down there. But that was sort of like the first sort of step of, let me break out and see what else is out there in the world. And, and high school was fun, and high school was amazing. I think in high school is where I started to get into theater class. It was a short little side note. So I think my junior year or my senior year of high school, I was in the high school play, and it was A Midsummer Night's Dream, and it's me and Q-Tip are the two leads in that. And every time I see Q-Tip now, we always laugh about the fact that we were both the stars of that show. I went off to, a corporate sort of world. He became, a hip-hop legend, which is amazing, right? But that's sort of the cornerstones, like some of the building blocks there, right? But imagination is obviously what you have at the time when you don't have a lot of utility, a lot of resource, and you don't have a lot of facility, right? You kind of invent it in your head. And I think a lot of that energy that I had as a kid and been putting it into theater, putting it into, stuff that we did around the neighborhood are the things that I sort of carry to this day and put into the business and put into crafting all the companies I've been involved with, all the different things I've done. And it's fun, and I try to make it fun, right? It has to be fun, or else, what are we doing here, right? And so I think I carry that, forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And the importance of representation, because your mom pointed to someone who maybe had a similar background as you, or at the bare minimum had the same ethnicity, and was like, you too can be that and better. And also the power of having people believe in you and having a village, right, and a support system. So you talked about junior high, you talked about picking schools. Between then and roughly now, right? What did you decide to study? What did your early career look like?
Yeah, I was a film and television major in college.
Okay.
Um, and while I was going to school, I ended up getting my first job at an advertising agency that I didn't know what it was. I didn't know what an agency was. I didn't know what they did. I remember I I cut class, came home early, was a little bit down, like, what am I going to do? A little perdido, right? A little lost. Like, okay, am I going to go into computers? Whatever that meant, right? Which is so funny. Like, it's not a thing now. And I had applied for a bunch of jobs in the newspaper, right? Literally just going to the back of the newspaper, no monster.com, right? None of that stuff existed back then, and you just sort of call a number from an ad that was about this big. And I called and left a message for an ad that was like, data entry needed, no experience necessary. And, obviously I had a Commodore 64, right? I had all these computers, at a younger age, so I knew kind of más o menos how to manipulate that. I said, a data entry job can't be that hard to do, so let me go do that. So I cut class, and as I was coming home and I stuck my key in the door, the phone was ringing. So I had to rush to the door. I picked up the phone, and it was some person on the phone, and she said the following to me. She goes, "Hi, is this Joe Bernard?" I go, "Yeah, this is Joe. Hi, my name is, so-and-so, and I represent a company called J. Walter Thompson, and I see that you've applied for a job here. We'd love to have you come in for an interview." That's what she said. What I heard was, "Hi, my name is so-and-so, and I am calling from such and whatever." I don't know what she said, and can you come in for an interview? And, of course, the last piece is all I cared about. I said, yeah, absolutely. Let me go in. So I threw on my high school graduation suit, the only suit I had. I went down to this interview, and I kind of passed. I kind of got through. And at the end of the interview, she said, "Well, I'm going to take you in to go see the media director of the media department." That's what it was. But she said all that, didn't know what that meant. "Are there any questions that you have for me before I take you down?" And I said, "Yeah, I've got two. What is the name of this company, and what do you guys do?" which,
oh my goodness,
which
Joe.
in today's world,
that would
it's
not
like
fly.
you're fired before you get hired, right? I can, but that's what I said. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know what she did, and there was no. I didn't even think about doing research in advance. Could you even do research in advance in like 1988? It's not like there was all this information available to you in that way. She said, yeah. She said, the company's called J. Walter Thompson. We're one of the oldest advertising agencies in the country. And what we do is we do commercials and advertising. And I said, "Oh, advertising commercials, that's great. Do you guys shoot commercials here too?" She was like, "Well, there's all these different sort of departments. There's media, there's account management, there's planning." Flying all over my head. Don't know what any of that means. She said, "But these are great questions, Joe." And she laughed at the whole thing because she thought it was, I guess, kind of endearing. And then she said, so it was like a part-time job. So she goes, "I wrote down all the hours that you could work on this pad." And she took the pad, she tore the top page out, and she handed it to me. She goes, "When you go downstairs, make sure you give this to Larry," who's the guy I was going to go meet. And when I got the paper, I looked at it, and the paper, I'm telling you, so green. The paper had the logo, J. Walter Thompson, written on the top of the, as a stamp. And I'm an idiot, and I said, "Man, you got some great handwriting. Look how you wrote J. Walter Thompson." And she goes, "Oh, my God." And she pulled up the pad. She goes, "It's stamped on every page," right? So it just shows, like, how much I didn't know, and to a degree how much, I guess, some of that knowledge you just don't have, access, information. It's sort of like, in a weird way, un milagro that I even got through any of that stuff, right? But I got through, And then I met with a guy named Larry Grossberg, who is, for some of you out there who hear this, a legend in the media buying space. And I worked for Larry for about 5 years, and I learned everything there needed to be learned about media buying and how you assess value to different programs. All of the, we had some of the biggest accounts at the time, so everyone and their mother was coming into the office, right? So, Hasselhoff was coming in, selling Baywatch, right? So I'm sitting there in a room with David Hasselhoff, his father and his manager, talking about how can we do a Ford deal and integrate the Ford cars on the beach and make those and how, to his credit, I think David Hasselhoff was probably one of the early brand integration guys, ever. And whatever, Ted Turner was walking in and Barry Diller was walking in and all of these,
So you had a front row seat
yeah,
to history, honestly.
Titans of the industry walking in and rubbing me on my head going, hey, Junior, how are you? And it was fun. And, and I'm the only Puerto Rican kid in the entire sort of unit and the staff. But I had the benefit of seeing everyone come in. And Barry Diller wasn't even full-on Barry Diller at the time, right? He wasn't, he might have just been at USA at the time, right? He wasn't IAC Interactive. Ted Turner, I think at that time was already Ted Turner. He had already built CNN, and he was working on some Native American project at the time. But still, like all these folks, I mean, Byron Allen was coming in, after Real People. Look that up, people. And he was just getting started in syndication, right? So it's interesting to see that. Maybe I'm dating myself right now.
No, please. This is part of the process, because this is how you started. And I think it is really important to talk about the fact that no journey, especially as it relates to personal and professional, is linear. So it sounds like those 5 years were your boot camp. They laid the groundwork in addition to your touch with creativity prior to that. And how did that all lead you to start, getting involved on even more of the business side, and eventually getting involved with NGL?
Yeah. So, right. So coming out of high school into college and then sort of working college at night. So I was going to night school and then working during the day at the agency. It kind of dawned on me that the best way I could become a Hollywood actor, which is what I thought would probably be the thing, coming out of, doing a lot of theater and stuff like that, was to learn the business side of it all, right? Let me be a smart actor. Let me kind of understand how this all works. So working at the agency kind of taught me a whole perspective about that, right? If Hasselhoff is coming in trying to do a marketing deal,
they must be doing something right.
Right. It just showed that that's a dimension of understanding that you need to have, right? Before I hit it big, right? Before I become whatever. And so little by little, I started to learn the business. And then one of the things I did learn was that Hispanic was very absent, right? Besides the fact that I was just the one person there at the time, there wasn't really conversations around what was happening with the Hispanic market. There wasn't anyone focused on it. There was no dialogue around the power of the Hispanic culture. Meanwhile, right, Siempre Domingo was happening on Univision, right? Telemundo was already a thing and growing. And so you had these two channels sitting over here that I would go home and my mom was watching, and I know was catching the attention of all these people. And yet that existence, that reality wasn't a reality over here. Nobody was talking about it. Until the day that American Hawaii Cruises, which was an account that we ended up landing, said that they wanted to do something in the Hispanic space. And then everybody panicked, like, oh my God, what do we do? And of course, we're in this meeting, and it came up that Hispanic was a component of what they wanted to do. And I, raised my hand. I said, well, I'll do it, right? I mean, I'm Spanish, and like I know the shows and I know the channels, and maybe I could work on this thing. And at that point, I'd already been around for a little while, so Grossberg was like, great, give it to the kid. Let the kid do it, right? It was sort of like, all right, let him handle it, right? So great. And I had this older woman, Nancy Price, God love her. She must have been 7 years old at the time, but she, sort of managed my management of that opportunity. And I started to learn more about the Hispanic market. And then in came, right, all the Barry Dillers of the Hispanic space, right? And all these fabulous Hispanic executives who managed Hispanic media, and they were just as rich looking and just as fabulous as all of the, you know, non-Latino people that I was dealing with on a daily basis, right? So, you know, Jerry Dominus, right, was the guy who ran CBS Sports for many years. Gotta go back to Marvin Goldsmith at ABC. All these guys that were like from the pillars, like when Bob Iger was like running TV stations, right? Right. So Iger wasn't even there yet, and like all of the older generation that maybe hired Iger, those guys were running around in New York City, and I got to see those people. And in came a bunch of Latinos that were kind of in the same universe, and I was like, holy smokes, there's my angle, right? Like my mother said, you could be just like them. Well, here the them that I could be just like. And I started to really then see that there was an opportunity for me to kind of grab hold of Hispanic. So, you know, Sprint was called U.S. Sprint at the time, right? Listerine was produced by a company called Warner Lambert at the time, then became, I think, GlaxoSmithKline that ultimately became Haleon today. All those brands needed some form of Hispanic, and they just kept giving it to the kid. And I just kept working, you know, the Hispanic. I became the Hispanic buyer and all these people. And eventually I became friends with a lot of them, and I crossed over to the sales side in radio the first time. The first sales job was in radio, selling the 1994 World Cup, which ironically was in Los Angeles in the States in 94. Now this coming year, they're going to be in the States again. So I sold the 94 World Cup in radio. Shout out to Tony Hernandez, because Tony was one of those fabulous executives that came in from the outside. And I was like, this is a guy that kind of is showing me where I could go. And I sold the World Cup. That was fun in 94, but all radio. Because I couldn't get a TV job, right? Because obviously that's what you want. You know, internet didn't exist, so you want to go to TV. So I had to kind of build my way there. Did radio for a year. That company got bought out, and I went to Telemundo like just before that whole transaction happened. And I got a job on the station side selling, you know, all the TV stations in the union of Telemundo for about 5.5 years. And that's where I, you know, learned so much of now more the sophisticated side of the business, more of the client universe around the country, all the station people that, you know, some of which are now leaders in various ways today. And that was fun. And then what happened? So many things happened, right? And freestyle music was going on, and this whole cross-culture, bicultural thing was really starting to kind of take off, right? You know, Selena, that accident happens in Corpus Christi, and that's when I think everything sort of just went turbocharged at that point, right? Obviously, People in Espanol got invented in part because the Time Warner people saw the popularity of what happened with Selena when they put her on the cover of Regular People. And remember, she was an English language. Well, she was a Spanish language artist who lived in English language bicultural life, right? And that was a great demonstration of the biculturalness and the power of that and what was happening. And I said, well, that's the future, right? You know, Spanish language is great, but there's a whole generation like me that speaks fully English, Spanish. I want the best of what I can do for myself, my family, and at that time, eventually for the children I will eventually have, you know. And we did that, and so I left to go build out Urban Latino magazine, which when print was still a thing, and that was a 3-year incredible run of just fun and flavor and, you know, having a little swag in the marketplace. And it took Hispanic media from being, you know, novelas and el noticiero and, you know, whatever that was, to a bit more of an urban feel, a little hip hop feel, a little bit more, you know, progressive feel. And we did all kinds of stuff at the magazine. Remember, at the time, magazines had to 3-dimensionalize their product by doing events and parties and all that stuff. We did all that stuff. And I remember Al Gore coming to campaign for his, presidential thing at one of the parties, and I have Wyclef dancing with Corinna Gore.
What? This
Which
sounds
I
like
hope
a
Corinna
movie.
Gore doesn't see this. Yeah. Like that, we had, Jay-Z when he was just coming out, with parties with him, and it's just everybody. We see everybody, right? And it was just an energy, right? It's like the 90s, like kind of the early 2000s. So it's kind of that whole thing. And because of the work we did with Urban Latino, when Telemundo bought GEMS, which was the Gary Edward McBride station, GEMS, which is a cable channel focused on the Hispanic dominant person. I had a lot of novellas on there. And NBC then bought Telemundo like 10 minutes later. And NBC said, okay, we got this cable channel that's focused on, women and novellas. And then the core proposition of Telemundo is obviously primetime with novellas and so on. We got to change this to something else. And someone over there, some demographer said, well, U.S. born is growing, bilingual's a thing. Let's turn this cable channel into a bilingual, urban, hipper, cooler, cable proposition called Mundos. And Mundos was named off of Telemundo, right? It's Telemundo and then Mundos, right? Almost the second version, the bicultural, all that. And I got a phone call like minutes into it. And they were like, you're the guy. You got to come over here. Come back. And I don't know who I looked at, I guess my parents. And I was like, I'm doing this.
How old were you at the time? Just to add some perspective.
Probably 34.
Okay.
It's probably 34 when that came in, right? So, because I is that right? I think so. I got
around, give or take.
Around, definitely my 30s. Yeah, it was, and that was the opportunity to take the Urban Latino project and sort of put it on a much bigger platform. Right now, I had a bigger stick to wave. We were doing bigger things, broader things. I mean, Mundos put reggaeton in the United States, right? I mean, I remember Daddy Yankee, he just have this gold eagle thing on his arm, right? I remember a lot of celebrities coming down to the show that we produced that still to this day carries a little bit of, people talk about it all the time, that show called The Roof that we did. And it was like in living color and a lot of music videos. And music videos in the Hispanic space were horrific. They would like shot with $2 budgets. If you, if you guys watch Drink Champs and you see, Jesse and Yuli, they're the two guys who did the casting, and Jesse's a big film director. Jesse was one of the first guys to really take the, black urban Hype Williams style of music video shooting and apply it to the Hispanic space and kind of changed the game in that world, right? But when we were doing it, it was still early days, and so it wasn't the same quality, but we brought it into the marketplace. And so Daddy Yankee, was cute to all the girls and was marketable to all the guys, right? Because he had that swag, and everybody else, Nicky Jam and Tego Calderon, and they all came through. Pitbull came through a few years later. And we had this incredible channel that aimed to do that. But in many ways, the proposition of building a bicultural, English-dominant, Hispanic media platform was still maybe a little bit early days, right? The marketplace wasn't ready for it. The purists still wanted to do it in Spanish language. The advertising was predominantly still Spanish language. I remember getting into strong discussions around, would this proposition chip away at the value of all the people who were been 30, 50 years building a proposition in Spanish language. And now we're 20 years since then, and clearly Spanish language still matters. It's still a thing. But, the marketplace has evolved on both ends.
And the duality is more important more than ever.
Yeah. Duality is more important than ever before. So Mundos was a good run. 13 years. I think we did that. And all along, the Leguizamo relationship had been there with John, right? John was on the first cover of Urban Latino. He was on the 10th anniversary cover of Urban Latino. And then my my initial partners from the NGL side had already started building out a business in many ways parallel to what we were doing over at Mundo. So, we all kind of knew each other and interfaced with each other. And when the Telemundo run ended, I immediately jumped over to the NGL business because it was now the continuance of that work, right?
Yes.
To continue to put the bicultural person in the forefront of what the marketing value could be, right? And this time doing it in what was now the flipping over into digital. And that's kind of where it is now, right?
Yeah.
And then we eventually merged with mitú, and mitú in an interesting way had a parallel existence to the NGL business, right? About the same 10 years, 13, 14 years together. They were doing it on the social media side. We were doing it on the content distribution, B2B side. And then the wisdom was to bring it all together, right? It was, chocolate, peanut butter, we've got a Reese's.
A natural mix.
Yeah, that's right.
And we'll get more into that in just a moment. But I'm curious to know, there's a common thread of your story so far, and it's a couple of things. At a very early age, being exposed and having this front seat at the table, right, of all of what you mentioned to be the titans, right, and all of these leaders that became, the household names that we know now, especially if we're familiar with the industry. And also kind of paving the way because, starting off at a young age, the only Latino, and then being tasked with those projects, not necessarily having a blueprint to follow. So how would you say that those two experiences contribute to what shaped your leadership style?
Yeah, some of it is throwing the hat over the wall, as they say. You kind of don't really know where it is, but you might know here, right? And I think I asked Ted one time. It's so weird to even say this, right? Because it just feels like who? Like that's like George Washington, right? But I asked Ted, how he built his business, and he kind of said something to that effect. Like he knew what he wanted to do, but he also didn't know all of it, and I think he had to be open to understanding that the puck will go in certain directions that you may not anticipate, but that may not be the worst thing in the world. I think the Latinidad for me has always been prime in what I do, and I mean the fact that we're very familia oriented, right? And I think that my management style, is sort of learn what you can from the guys who've done it, girls who've done it, right? The Hispanic advertising business, most of the titans of that business, you got Lionel Sosa, you've got, Eduardo Caballero, but there's a lot of women who really built the Hispanic media business, right? On the agency side for sure. So you learn even from them, right? Imagine all the hardship that they had to go through to get financing and run a business and, trust. There's a lot of stories there. But the familial part of it, right? We're doing it all together, right? I think that helps you not be so fearful, right? All right, well, we're all gonna fail, right? And I think, if you ask people now, my management style is a little bit of that, right? It's like, it's a team. We're all doing it together, ride or die with, the folks that, work with me, even the folks that don't work with me, right? Where there's a joke that we say that I have an invisible staff, right? That I have the current staff and people who work with me, and that there's other universe of people that, I can call upon to help me out that aren't on payroll, the invisible staff. And I think that's the way I go about it. I don't know if it's right or wrong. It's worked for me. But yeah, it's like, and then try to have some form of imagination, right? This is a business that's constantly being reinvented, right? We're in the middle of a giant reinvention now. Like somebody had to think about, AI and where that's going to go and what that's going to do. And it's okay to try a few things and figure it out, right? Quibi didn't really work so well, but
Well, you live and you learn.
You live and you learn, right? And Quibi's back in a way, right? There's a whole thing about vertical, series that are kind of what Quibi meant to be, a few years back. So now that's sort of coming back into vogue. I think that's sort of the way it is. I mean, that's sort of the best answer I got.
Okay. Well, diving into NGLmitú, which for those out there does not stand for, not gonna lie, it stands for New Generation Latino.
That's right.
talk about its mission and its vision and the fact that you all have 5 brands to go along with it and you specialize in the digital media landscape. Like, what sets you guys apart?
So we feel we stand apart a lot of ways. I think at the core essence is sort of the same thing. My mom saying, "Hey, that guy on the motorcycle is Latino like you." Right? Representation is so important. If my mother didn't do that or call that out, you know, who knows what would have been, you know, for me, right? But that showed me, right? And I think for mitú, from the very beginning, it was always been about how do we put together an opportunity where we can show ourselves off or show ourselves off to other members of our community so that we all can learn about things that we're doing around the country. NGL Collective, when that business was in place, was the same thing, right? It was all about, you know, showing the marketplace from content the power of who we are, right? The DNA of both businesses align with what Leguizamo has always been about, right? You know, John is still a member of the company. You know, his whole career has been about, let me share with you a whole other dimension to who we are as a people.
Like who we really are.
Yeah, a little bit of that too, right? Not the image that might be bestowed upon us, right? Let me show you that. And when he did that, all the people who saw that reacted to it and said, "Oh my God, I want to, you know, I relate to that. I want to be that way." And in mitú, we hear that all the time, right? The content that we produce is so relatable. That's why we carry so many fans, right? 15 million fans every single month are touching the content across any one of those 5 social channels. And they're touching it to the point that they're engaging with it, right? They're commenting, they're writing back, they're liking, they're forwarding, right? They're high-fiving, if you will, the content that we produce. And so it is that opportunity to be an accurate reflection of what Latinidad in America is, right? And so mitú does that as its mission. The overall company does it at its mission. And it's soup to nuts, right? Even the employee base that we have, you know, for the most part represents that and is providing opportunities for people who want to do that, right? Hey, I really relate to what you guys are doing in content. I have ideas. How do I bring that, you know, forward? And maybe you guys can help me be the vehicle to help get my work done. So when we built the filmmakers program, right, which kind of started from a different idea that we call the incubator program, but the same concept of like, okay, now we're this thing. We have this machine. We have studios out in Los Angeles and Burbank. We're producing content every day. We are a beacon for other people to come and try stuff and show us stuff and, you know, learn from us. We learn from them. And so when our friends at Walmart came along and said, you know, we're interested in supporting something that does this, we were like, we have just the idea, right? And we built this filmmaker program that's now, you know, in its 3rd year, where we've provided the opportunity for a bunch of, you know, younger individuals who want to break into the business to use our facility to work alongside us. The most important part, to draw dollars and financing that Walmart graciously gives us to provide them the resource so they can go film a number of short films and then give them the opportunity to get equipment, supplies, right? You know, I'm sitting here in a podcast studio with you, right, with a mic and there's lights and there's, you know, cameras here.
Which makes all the difference in terms of the quality.
Yeah, correct. Like all this stuff costs money. And so not everyone has the wherewithal to do it. So we figured out a way that we could be an incredible conduit between companies that want to support this type of initiative and people who are looking to be part of this initiative, right? Yeah. And it is an incredible position to be in the center of all of that, right? Yeah. And where we can sort of, you know, provide that support. And so that's been the mission of the company. And with the filmmaker series that Walmart produces and supports, we're actually doing that in real time, which is amazing.
Yeah. Talk about the selection process and the evolution of the program. You know, you said it's in its third season. I know recently these short films were showcased at the Miami Film Festival. So at the core of these stories, it's stories about our communities and our traditions and family and all of that good stuff. So what goes into the selection process?
Yeah, so we have a team that's made up of both the West Coast team and a few folks over here. We put a call out, every single year. We get submissions. There's a process of, analyzing, interviewing, discussing, who has the right fit and right criteria for what we're looking for. They ultimately wind it down to about 4. The first year we did it, we had a celebrity mentor that would come in and sort of help out. And so John was the celebrity mentor that year. And if you go to YouTube, I think you can look it up. And there's this great piece of video where, the doors open to our studio and all the mentees or all the filmmakers are sitting there. They don't know who's coming through that door. And then John shows up and it's like, wow, and it's a moment, right?
This year was Oz Rodriguez, no?
Yeah, this year was Oz, he's also great and fantastic. And next year, in year 4, we're going to go even bigger. In year 2, in an attempt to try to make it bigger, we asked the folks at Paramount Pictures to lend a hand, right? Because at the end of the day, we have relationships with the ultimate goal of the filmmakers is, okay, well, I got to work with some sort of bigger entity that actually does movies, right? And now it's more than just the studios, right? It could be Netflix, could be Amazon. And so the folks at Paramount, of course, opened their doors and, let all the, folks into the studios. They could see that. They organized a number of meetings with development executives, so that's important, right? So how do I get my idea to that screen over there, right? And there's a whole bunch of things in between. So the development executives sat with that year's crop of filmmakers and, schooled them on what it takes and showed them, what they could do. And maybe there's some connection or two that were made there that hopefully, play in the future. This year, the film festival is a big part of that down in Miami. Oz, another big component of that, who's a very successful, writer, producer. And we hope that, in the 4th year next year, that we can get a couple of more folks to come in and help support the program even further, so we can broaden, what the help is to everybody, right?
Yeah.
And we try to keep the focus very much on the filmmakers, right? I mean, everybody has their goals and missions and KPIs, and will deliver against all those. But the number one KPI is, how do you help this person who wants to go from A to B to C with their career? And we think that, we've done a good job of showing that over the last 3 years. Some of the filmmakers stay within our roster of opportunities. So when we get commercial brand deals or we have the opportunity to shoot things, we'll include some of those filmmakers in some of those projects as well, because why not? It's like, now they're a filmmaker, right? Why do we not use them for something?
Roughly speaking, would you say that the filmmakers who join this program are in the early stages of their career?
Yeah, I would say so. I don't know that all of them are like brand new. I mean, they obviously have some chops. I mean, when you look at what they've done, right?
Yeah,
it's
the quality shows.
Yeah, it's there, so it shows. But it's, like everyone, some people have a lot of experience, just haven't had the break. A lot of people don't have experience but are trying to gain it.
Yeah.
And the program is about helping all of that, but fundamentally show multicultural filmmakers, show their stories.
Well, the reason that I ask is because precisely what you were saying of that gap between experience and talent and the opportunity, and there's so many things that go into the mix, and sometimes it just takes someone to say, I believe in you, and here are the tools that I have access to that will help you get to the step that you're hoping to make. Are there any success stories? I mean, the fact that these filmmakers have made it as far as they have is already a success, if you ask me. But are there any particular success stories that have come out of this film program? Maybe there was a film that was selected and someone got their big break, or they're on their way to doing something like that they might not have otherwise had.
Yeah, we know for sure that most of them have moved on to get other jobs, and they're doing projects here and there. So that's good, right? Is anyone, shooting The Odyssey right now? Not yet.
Not yet.
Not yet. but but think of it, we have 2 years, in our background, really
Yeah.
3 years in our background.
Yeah.
I think as we now cross into the fourth year, I think there's a greater potential for that. And maybe with more help from other companies, there might be an opportunity to create a stronger destination for people, right? Like what I hear all the time is there've been a ton of music reality show, find the singer programs, and then so-and-so wins, but so-and-so's never seen again, right?
Yeah.
We're not trying to have that be, and this isn't like a reality competition,
Right.
thing either, right? This is just a very simple program of, organizing assets, resources, external supporting companies to provide an opportunity for someone to really build their career, right? And, maybe 5 minutes from now, somebody has their big opus, maybe 5 years from now, that's what it is. What we hope is that when that day comes, that individual turns around and says, I remember doing that thing with Me Too and how great that was. And hopefully that'll be their Eric Estrada moment, right?
Yeah. As you look to the future, what do you hope in an ideal world? You have all the access to the partners that you have built relationships with. What do you want this to turn into? Would you like it to be like a household name in the film industry where people can say, oh, that's an incubator for already successful, already established filmmakers beyond just sharing the very important stories?
Yeah, for sure, building credibility that we are doing great work that the industry acknowledges as a credible institutional thing is certainly a North Star, right? I think we're maybe a couple of years from that, but I think we're certainly going to be there soon. But the other vision for it is, does it have to be film only? Could it expand to music?
Yeah.
We have the good fortune of our parent company, Go Digital Media Group, that owns, first off, a ton of music rights, and then they have a label, and the label manages artists, right? And there's an opportunity to maybe bridge some of that credible music business that they have over to this program, so that maybe there is, a film sort of extension, and then maybe there's a music extension, and then from that point on, who knows, right?
The sky's the limit.
Right.
I think.
We have a one of the social channels we have is called Hispanic Kitchen, right?
I know.
Right. We affectionately call it HK, right? Maybe there's a culinary, evolution to this as well. Food, chef, something like that. It could be much broader. And I think we're just now starting to get a lot of attention to the program. Even me doing this podcast is a sort of example of the attention that the program is getting. And hopefully we'll be able to broaden and expand it further, because there's a Latino story of creator everywhere, right? Everywhere.
What would you say is one of the biggest challenges and also opportunities in reaching bicultural U.S. Latino audiences today? And what role is NGLmitú kind of contributing to that?
Yeah, look, it's always been this challenge, right? Years ago, one of the arguments against going to bilingual, bicultural, moving the ball away from the Spanish dominant side is that the Spanish dominant side was fairly easy to identify, right? It was like if you had challenges with the language or you appreciated that audience, it was kind of easy. They were here, right? The minute you go to bilingual, bicultural, English dominant, now that eyeball is competitive across everything, right? Is it social? Is it all of cable television? Is it all of broadcast television? It's all just scattered about into the universe. So there's no easy way that you can collect a bunch of them and say, I have a substantial amount of them in this one place that you can talk to, speak to, target, sell your product or service. So that's still a challenge now, even more so. And that's not just a Latino thing, that's an everybody thing, right? Because now essentially it's going to be a one-to-one relationship between brand and the individual, because you can't just sit back and say, well, I just want to go ahead and target a female that's 18 to 49, right? It's a wide range of audience there.
There's
right?
also a lot of nuances that go along with that.
Right, correct. You can't, they're not all moms, they're not all 20. They all don't have the same level of interest, right? I like hip hop, I like goth music, right?
Yeah.
So as I think as the marketing media landscape changes and it's going to become more sort of focused on, how do you target people who have the same interests, and maybe some of the sort of clustering of Hispanic versus African American, it doesn't matter, right? You could just have all these people, they all love Taylor Swift. It doesn't matter what color, hair color, racial background they are. Yeah. They're just all Swifties, right? So you have like a demo that's like a Swiftie demo, right? Or a Shakira demo, or a Karol G demo, right? I know, right? Everyone loves Karol G. She's going to have a great year next year.
Yes, and I think as a result, Latinos are as well, with Bad Bunny in the Super Bowl, with, her also doing all the things that she's going to continue to do.
And we should talk about that, because I think that's something that maybe not everyone is sort of putting together, or some people put it together in a very limited way. But, the marketplace has been in a challenging place the past year and a half. And I'm saying the advertising marketplace, but challenges beyond our marketplace still exist, of course. And you have this situation where the image of the Latino seems to somehow gotten a bad rap, right? And it's a frustrating thing for me, and I think a frustrating thing for all of us, right? To see that somehow, how are we in this sort of place, right? And as you turn the page from 25 to 26, I think everyone's going to feel a little bit of that back, in the sense that, we don't like that. And we're going to show you positively what our power really means, right? And the power that we really have. Yeah. And we have Super Bowl, and that'll be what that is. Yes. And that'll be amazing. You have Karol G at Coachella, which is amazing, right?
You've got the World Cup.
You've got World Cup. But then there's other stuff entre medio, right? Like some Latino's going to win a Oscar, Grammy, Golden Globe. There'll be a moment like that, right? Somebody's going to win some political race in some place, and that's going to be a thing. I mean, for all the talk about, the Nobel Prize. The Nobel Prize went to a Latina. Right?
Maria Corina.
Right, exactly. Let's not forget that. That just happened, everybody, right? So there's these moments, these glimpses, these, what do you call them? PowerPoints. Yeah. Let's call them these PowerPoints that I think are going to string together an incredible momentum forward pushback, if you will, about how great our marketplace is. 100%. Right? And if you're a smart marketer or smart anyone, lean into that, right? Because that's going to be an ever growing part of our company. Absolutely. Right? So imagínate if my mother showed me one Eric Estrada. What does that one kid see when there's 17 of these things that happen?
And that's what I was going to say. These are almost these cultural moments, right? And these milestones para la cultura, but also for so many other things, are almost like entry points that when you unite them, when we present a united front, we say, we're doing great in music and sports and politics at a national, international, local level. Yeah. It's no longer it's just a cool thing for now. It's like, wow, toca ponerle atención a esta gente,
It's not going to go away, exactly. Right? I just, for all the pullback that happened, you have to sit back and say, so are you basically raising your hand saying that you are not into growth? Growth? Yeah.
Because numbers don't lie either.
I don't want growth. We should just all give them T-shirts that says growth with a big old circle, right? Because that's what you're saying, is that if you kind of pull back from this audience, then you're not aligning to where things are going to grow, and that's going to grow your business. It's going to grow all your revenue. Yeah. It's the future of all your sales, right? Yeah. And it sort of boggles the mind that some people have sort of opted out to a degree, right? And not everywhere, because there are some great, people who said, doesn't matter, I'm all in. So I appreciate that for those people who did it. But there's equally a good group of people that said, let me just sort of figure out a different way. There is no different way, guys. This is going to continue to grow. And despite what may have happened and all of the accidental and purposeful adjustments that have been made, you're going to see an incredible snapback in 26. And I'm looking forward to,
Me too.
obviously being in the center of it all, right?
Yeah.
Because that's what we are. At NGLmitú, nothing in this country happens in the Hispanic space without it crossing our desk. And so it's fun to have built a business over 15 years where you are kind of in the center point of that. You know, my guy John has been the mouthpiece for this audience for, a good long time. He's on Broadway now.
Yes, he is.
He finishes November 23rd. It's amazing to see those points. And so I'm looking forward to Ryan Seacrest dropping that ball, and then 26, it's on, so it'd be kind of fun.
But also, let's have a Latino Ryan Seacrest. Let's have some representation at these even bigger moments too, As we talk about the future, to close us off, what is something that, we already talked about so many things that we're looking forward to, but any exclusive, any inside scoop that you can give us? What is coming up for NGLmitú, something that we can look forward to?
Yeah, I think 26 turns a page into greater enthusiasm within our company, about our company. We've been tinkering around for the last 6 months, maybe longer, on how to make an even better, stronger business. So we do feel that you're going to hear and feel the company more next year. Filmmakers will continue and be bigger, we hope. There is a lot of discussion around finding ways to embrace our fans, create more opportunities for fandom, right? Whether that be live events, whether that be figuring out ways to give back to that audience that's been giving to us all this time. I think you're going to see evidence of that over time. We'll continue to develop out, all 5 of the brand channels. Our content team continues to grow and build longer form content, so we'll see where the longer form content takes us, whether that be building out our own thing or maybe somehow the content just finds itself in other places, so that the mitú brand exists in broader places beyond just the social universe. I think that's a sign of what's to come. You're going to hear a lot more from more of us, right? We've got an incredible, talented group of people, right? And they all share the same vision and passion that I have and many of the senior leadership does. But you're going to see a lot more of us in multiple capacities, which I think is going to be a bigger thing for the company as, you get a stronger sense of the size and scale of who we are.
Absolutely.
And then whatever, I'm sure there'll be, a couple of things that we're not talking about that'll become reality. And then in the Ted Turner phase, there'll be things that the puck will go that we didn't expect. That'll be amazing.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much. I look forward to seeing all of that, maybe being a part of it.
Yeah.
You have obviously my full support, my admiration for all the work that you guys are doing, and honestly, how passionately and authentically your team is pushing forth our narratives, our very important stories, and uniting us at the end of the day. Because we were talking off camera earlier how your team is kind of all over the country, all over the world, but nonetheless, we do have relatable experiences, and someone on the other side of the country or anywhere else has lived through similar things that you and I have, and that's what ultimately brings us together. So, que orgullo de verdad. Thank you so much for joining me, and all the best.
Thank you. No, thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity to say hi and say hi to the fans.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you all for watching and listening. Until next time.